Jahannam is covered with, things that have been decorated for the human being as very nice and very desirable. Whereas Jannah is covered in trials and tribulations and afflictions. What hardships are you experiencing towards your commitment to the Ummah? Do you feel that holding this membership of being part of the Ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, do you feel the weight of this membership in your life? Ibn al-Qayyim, he mentions in Madarij al-Salikin, he says, لَقَدْ أَجْمَعَ الْعَارِفُونَ عَلَى أَنَّ الرَّجَاءَ لَا يُصْلِحُ إِلَّا مَعَ الْعَمَلِ. That those of knowledge have a consensus that hope, the mere fact of having hope for the victory of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, having hope for the victory of the people of Palestine, having hope to see a light at the end of the tunnel. This hope is not done correctly, and it's not accepted إِلَّا مَعَ الْعَمَلِ, except unless you pair with the action.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear brothers and sisters, welcome back to our second episode of the Ummah's Revival podcast, this brand new series that we just launched a couple days ago. You guys saw our first episode, and alhamdulillah, we saw a lot of positive feedback from the community. And so we wanted to come back and give you guys a second episode. And today we have, with myself, we have Brother Muhammad, who is not just, a dear friend to me, but he's a brother, he's an activist in the community. And I'll let him introduce himself, and then inshallah, we can kind of get into today's topic. Go ahead, Brother Muhammad.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Muhammad Nusayrat. I'm currently in my last year of undergrad. Inshallah, planning on doing graduate school in the field of computer science. And of course, passionate about Islam. I'm involved in, typical MSA work, community work, trying to strengthen Muslim community as much as we can. Focusing on maintaining this Muslim identity in the West. That's pretty much my role, or what I'm interested in right now.
Jazakallah khair for being with us here today, Brother Muhammad. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the MSA that you're a part of is the largest MSA in the United States, right?
Yeah. So it's not one of the largest for sure.
Yeah. So, mashallah, you've gotten probably experience, and you've gotten a very diverse experience, right? With thousands of people coming thousands of Muslims coming to this university and being involved in the Muslim Student Association. And then I'd like to mention, I know Muhammad is trying to be humble, but he is also enrolled in an alim program, mashallah, at Mishka University. And then he's also working on a book, an Islamic book, and inshallah, it will be published very soon. And so we can kind of get into those topics a little bit later. But I did want to start off today's discussion with one of the hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet gave us many glad tidings. And we look at these glad tidings to reflect and to see how can we be a part of these glad tidings that the Prophet ﷺ gave us. And in one of the hadiths, he mentioned, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, Bada al-Islamu ghariban wa sayaudu ghariban kama bada, fatuba lil ghuraba. The Prophet ﷺ is saying that Islam began as something strange, and it will return to being something strange. So glad tidings to the strangers. Brother Muhammad, what do you think about this hadith? How does it apply to, your day-to-day life? What lessons have you derived from this hadith in your journey so far as a Muslim?
Yeah, so Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. So when I look at this hadith, or I think about this hadith, like the first thing that comes to my mind is how when you're at school or at university, again, because I'm in university right now, you see that truly Islam is very strange. It's something that if you wear it, it's strange. If, like, for example, if I go to school in a thobe, right, you stand out, right? Or if you speak in a certain way, even like small things, right? Like, for example, saying inshallah, mashallah, these phrases that you kind of use in a normal conversational basis, that's something that's strange. And even if, like, we consider on like a bigger societal standpoint, the values that we carry as Muslims in terms of not drinking or not partying, or not intermixing or free mixing with women very easily, not shaking the hands of a non-mahram woman. These are things that are seen as strange, and it's something you kind of have to deal with, especially in the West. And to be honest, it's like a very, it's a double-edged sword in my opinion. And I think we'll get more into this, as we go, but it's something that can actually be very beneficial for a Muslim if channeled in the proper manner, versus also very detrimental in the sense that if it causes the person to lose their iman and get weaker in the iman and be someone who just assimilates into the society.
Okay, I see. Yeah. Do you think this concept of being strange for Muslims, is it only prevalent in the Western society? Because we live here in the West, right? But we both of us, we come from Muslim countries, right? Muslim lands back home.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we go back home, we see our families, we see our friends there. Do you think it's prevalent there as well? And I kind of wanted to like dive deeper into this topic of what does it mean
Mm.
that what is actually strange? What is the strange part here?
Yeah. So if we're gonna dive deeper into hadith, when we look at it, it says "Bada al-Islam ghariban," right? That Islam started off as something strange. So if we pause right there, we see the Meccan society where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam came up in. The way of life he lived in, from burying, the baby girls alive, right? To cheating in the scales, to slavery, to all these different practices, prostitution that were happening in society. These were things that completely contradicted Islam. And of course, the main thing of Tawheed of La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, to believe in one God and singling him out in his worship, right? This was all strange in society, right? So بدأ الإسلام غريبا. Islam started something strange. وسيعود غريبا كما بدأ. And it will return as something strange as it started. Now, before we get into like this part of the phrase, it's important to also realize that there's like a point that's hidden between the lines in this hadith, right? So when it says that it will return to being strange the way it started, it's also implying that when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was mentioning this hadith, that Islam was not strange anymore, right? And we know this hadith was said by Rasulullah
That's
sallallahu
very
alaihi wasallam.
interesting. Yeah.
It was
I've
said
actually
during
never thought
Medina.
about it from that perspective.
Yeah,
Yes. SubhanAllah. Uh,
it's an important point to focus on, right? Like when we're reading a hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's not just what he said, but it's what he's implying in his words, and of course what he chose not to say, right? So look
and
at yeah,
just to like make a quick point there, the Sahaba were very sharp. They understood these
100%,
things almost
100%, yeah.
immediately. And even the Tabi'in, the Tabi'in, right? So
Mm.
I agree with you 100% that we
Yeah,
need to
yeah,
understand the context, the bigger picture there. Yeah, keep going.
yeah. So the point I was trying to make was that looking at the Medinan society, right? We see that Islam was not just spread amongst the people as Muslims, but also implemented on a societal level where you didn't have these ills in society in terms of the spreading of prostitution, the spreading of cheating in the scales, spreading of burying children, right?
Mhm.
This
Yeah.
wasn't occurring. It wasn't prevalent in the society, right? So when we say at that point, when we make the claim at that point that Islam was not strange, we're saying that it was the norm on an individual and a collective level, right? So now if we return back to mentioning this part of the hadith, وَسَيَعُودُ غَرِيبًا كَمَا بَدَأَ, and it will return to being strange as it started. We see this very, very, very clear in our times today, right? On an individual and a collective level, right? So what do I mean by that exactly? Of course, the most obvious point is that not just here in the Western lands, but also in the Muslim lands, we see that Islam on a societal level isn't the way of life that is followed, right? It's something that governs the rulings of divorce and marriage, and it governs the rules of, maybe a little bit of social laws here and there. But in terms of the ruling system, its economic system, in its foreign policy, etc., which we all know, these are things that the system is set in place by the colonialists, right? Not governed by Islam. So in terms of a collective level or a societal level, it's definitely strange, right? And it's definitely something that is foreign to the current societies, right? But also on an individual level, right? And if you think about it this way, right? When we're talking about individual level, what we don't mean is that Islam is something that is strange when you're at the masjid or you're with your group of friends who are Muslim. Because at that point, we all have friends who are Muslim, and we feel very comfortable showing our Islam around them, right? When we say Islam will return to be something strange, right? We're not saying that in these circles of people who are holding on to Islam, that Islam will be strange. Rather, you as an individual carrying yourself as a Muslim following Islam in society, this is strange, right? And this is something we see, like to your question, we see this in the West and also Muslim lands. Like even I come from Jordan. Even in Jordan,
Mhm.
if you are someone who is truly holding on to Islam, in terms of, like,
Right.
for example, just even basics like going to the masjid consistently, these are things that are
Mhm.
looked at as, oh, like, this is kind of weird. Like going to the masjid consistently and praying your prayers there, that's something that's meant, or in society, it's like a norm that it's meant for people who are older. Someone who is,
Mhm.
he's gotten to like a sheikh level in the sense that he's gotten older.
The
It's not really
age
for
aspect, right?
exactly, yeah. It's not for
Yeah.
younger people.
Uh,
So
Yeah, the younger,
Islam,
they have bigger priorities, other goals.
yeah,
They have the dunya to
100%,
chase
yeah,
after, right?
100%.
And again, this is Western mentality, embedded colonialist mentality, right? And
Yeah,
subhanAllah, just to kind of add on to the point that you're mentioning, right? We saw what happened in Syria, right? For the
yeah,
last 50 years, we had the regime, the Assad
yeah,
regime, and like you said, right, even very normal things. And this is narrations from
yeah,
just recently when the regime was removed, and you saw the reports of why certain people were held in these brutal prisons, and you saw the charges that they had against them, right? Some of these charges, the fact that a person would wake up in the morning and walk to the masjid for Fajr Salah, spent maybe 10, 15, 20 years in prison for that. A woman, she denied marrying or wanting to marry someone who was from this regime itself, right? 10,
yeah,
20 years in prison. And this is again in the Muslim lands itself, right? SubhanAllah, one of the things that made me so sad, obviously, many of us saw the reports that came out. We saw what happened to these women, these men, these children. And one of the things that made me so sad was the reports of children coming out of these prisons that were born in these prisons. And they hadn't
yeah,
seen a world outside of these prisons. And they were shocked when they saw a tree or a bird because they didn't know a tree or bird existed. So subhanAllah, you mentioned this aspect of strangeness, right? And I kind of want to go back, before we look into the parallels of today,
mm,
what Makkah was like. I know you briefly mentioned it,
yeah,
but let's dive a little bit deeper into what the society was like when Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was given the message, or even before he was given the message, right? You had people that were worshiping idols, and these were people that came from a lineage of prophets. They had the right message from beforehand, right? And it got corrupted over time. And what happened was that one of the great grandfathers of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, I can't remember which one it was. I don't know if it was Qusay.
yeah,
Anyways, I'll have to double check it. But there was this leader, basically, of the Quraysh in Mecca who went to Bilad al-Sham, and he saw the people of Bilad al-Sham, worshipping idols and praising idols, and he thought that these people were religious people. And so he brought back, an idol, and he put it by the Kaaba, and the people
yeah,
saw
yeah,
this, chief of the tribe, right, doing this, and so everyone
yeah,
started to
yeah,
follow this and started
yeah,
worshiping these idols. And you think about, again, how they corrupted day after day, day after day. And this is, I mean, just one aspect. You mentioned the burial of the daughters. I think it was Umar bin Khattab that mentioned that they would create idols from dates, and then they would eat the
yeah.
dates afterwards, right?
He's
So it
recalling
shows
a story
also
of
the
himself. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes. Allah.
Any
It's
any other narrations that come to
yeah,
mind, or any other aspects? Yeah.
yeah. One thing that definitely came to mind, this tradition of idolship or worshiping idols, or using them as intermediaries to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah, the Quran talks about this, right? That we do not worship them إِلَّا لِيُقَرِّبُونَ إِلَى اللَّهِ زُلْفَى, that just to bring us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? That was their claim, because the Quran very clearly says, وَلَئِن سَأَلْتَهُم مَّنْ خَلَقَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ لَيَقُولُنَّ اللَّهُ, right? If you ask them who created, the skies, the earth, the land, everything, they'll say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's not that they didn't believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it's that they didn't single him out in his uluhiyyah, right? They didn't single him out, and in terms of submission to one God, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the categorical rejection of all these other idols. And again, they took their desires as God, right? And that's why you see all these different, fawahish and stuff spread in society, things that are blatantly wrong, blatantly, just destroying society. From what you mentioned of burying your own daughter. Like, imagine someone burying their own daughter because they see that this is less valuable, or this creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in their own lineage is less valuable than a man, so therefore we're going to bury that daughter.
Yeah.
SubhanAllah, yani,
Yeah.
it really is jahiliyyah. It really is based on ignorance.
SubhanAllah. Yeah, I just double checked, by the way. The person's name, it was Amr bin Luhay. Amr bin Luhay was one of the chiefs of Quraysh, and he brought this innovation, or this aspect, back to the people of Mecca. And one other thing I remember is, I know you mentioned prostitution, but going a little bit deeper into that, there was 4 different types of marriage before Jahiliyyah, or during the times of Jahiliyyah. And I don't want to go into details of them, because this hadith that's mentioned by Aisha radhiallahu anha, again, it's so disturbing and graphic. They mention one which is basically the type, which is still exists today in Islam, where someone goes and asks for the woman's hand. But the other types are absolutely horrific. They're basically number of men entering upon a woman and doing basically whatever they want, right? And then the woman picking randomly, or not randomly, but whoever she wants to pick as a father, or someone would come and basically try to do some genealogy or whatever, right? Try to match the fingerprints or the
The face,
the lines
yeah,
on your hand, right? Or the
yeah,
face, yeah. Try to find some
yeah.
resemblance. So absolutely, things that make no sense today, right? But this was the norm, right? And you think about in this time where this is the norm, like you said, cheating of the scales is the norm, slavery is the norm, monopolizing over these resources, the elites. And again, similar to what we're seeing today, this was the norm. And then you have somebody come and say that reject all of this, right? That I'm a warner and that you have to let go of your desires and you have to let go of your way of life because there is a way of life that's dictated by your Lord, your creator. And so you think about how strange that is. You really have to put yourself in that mindset, in that reality. And sure, some of
Yeah.
the earliest Sahabas, that converted or accepted the message of Islam, like Abu Bakr and Uthman radiallahu anhu and Sa'd bin Abi Waqqas, these were people that were, yes, noble people from their tribes, but then at the same time, you had people like Bilal radiallahu anhu, Abdullah
100%,
bin
yeah,
Masud, people that
yeah.
came from, Ali Yasir, the family of Yasir, that came from, slavery, or they were not, they didn't have big tribes, they didn't have a lot of wealth. And these people were met with, Khabbab bin Arat, these people were met with such harsh persecution because they believed in this message of La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, that there's no
Yeah.
other deity worthy of worship. There's no other way of life better than Islam, than the one that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed for us. These people were met with, like I said, the harshest conditions. They were met with
Yeah.
the absolute worst torture that anyone can imagine. And this is what the Prophet ﷺ meant, an aspect of the strangeness, right? This is what part of the strangeness is. And we see this, in times today, whether it's Syria, whether it's other parts of the Muslim world.
Yeah. Yeah, subhanAllah, like if you continue on that point, right, and you see that the end of the hadith says فَطُوبَى الْغُرَبَاء, right? That glad tidings are for the strangers. Like a lot of times we take it at face value and you say, oh, like it makes sense, like it sounds like a heroic thing, or it's like, like a minute small part of society. So Prophet is giving them a glad tiding. But if we take a step back and think from just like a normal human perspective, right? Humans don't want to feel strange normally. They want to fit into the crowd and they want to feel like they're part of a group and accepted, right? So why would Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam encourage, right? Because he's saying glad tidings are for the strangers in these times, right? So
Yeah.
the one who finds himself surrounded by a society or surrounded by a time or an era characterized by the strangeness of Islam, then him being strange is a glad tiding because he's attaching himself to Islam and grabbing onto that hot coal and staying away from all the other things that contradict Islam. And if we go like a little bit, I want to mention something like a little bit deeper into the hadith, right? Other narrations actually have an addition towards the end, right? They mention like as the Sahaba will ask, like, we ask Allah, like, who are these people? Who are these strangers, right? And one narration says, الَّذِينَ يُصْلِحُونَ إِذَا فَسَدَ النَّاسِ. The ones that correct or make righteous, right? إِذَا فَسَدَ النَّاسِ. When the people make corruption, right? The ones who
Mm.
make people correct. So, and actually, even if you go even deeper, another narration says, الَّذِينَ يُصْلِحُونَ مَا أَفْسَدَ النَّاسُ مِنْ سُنَّتِي. The ones who correct or again make righteous what the people corrupted from my sunnah. The sunnah of Rasulullah
Allah.
sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Uh,
Yeah, looking at this hadith, it's not, because a lot of times again we see it as something that, oh, this is something that we're taking from like a ritualistic perspective, or it's an individual perspective that, okay, I need to be someone who's grabbing onto my deen. So me wearing a thobe or growing out the beard, etc. This is me making myself strange, right, in the society,
mhm.
and therefore, I'm getting this thawab from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that, I'm becoming being given glad tidings, bushra, right? When we
Yeah.
look at the additions of the hadith, it's very clearly mentioning that they're people who are correcting the people, bringing the people back to the straight path after they deviated and spread corruption, right? So the
Enjoining
hadith,
the good and forbidding the evil. Yeah.
100%, 100%. And that's such an important part of Islam, such an important part of Islam. Without it, you can't call yourself truly strange or call yourself truly someone who is following this hadith, right? And I'll mention why. Right? If we go back to our example with Mecca, we see that there was many different religions, and the people of Mecca, Quraysh, they had no problem with bringing more and more new religions or people worshiping different things or people disagreeing on these religious concepts, right? But when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam came with La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah, it was very clear from day one, that this was a problem. And it was very clear aggression from day one towards Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when we ask ourselves why, it's because La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah is coming to correct the society. It's coming to change society. It's coming to fix the corruption that the people spread. So when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, "Bada al-Islamu ghariban," remember that in these other narrations, what is it mentioning? The ones who correct the people when they spread corruption in the land, right? So that's why Islam, when it came, it came as strange because it was correcting the corruption that was there. And then once there was a period where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions hadith, where this corruption has been gone, right? And Islam is now the dominant ideology. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gives, a prediction, and this is another sign of his prophethood, alayhi salatu wasalam, that a time will come where, again, corruption is spread in the land, and Islam is no longer visible as the ideology and the way of life that is dominant, and therefore it has become strange. And who are the strangers? The ones who call back for this way of life, the ones who call back to correcting the people, the ones who call back to removing this corruption that we see in a society, not just living with that corruption.
Allahu Akbar. That's honestly, like, to be completely transparent, that second part of the hadith that you mentioned, that's new to me. Obviously, I understood all this importance of enjoining the good and forbidding the evil. I didn't know it was tied to this hadith, so it just makes this even more powerful. And at the same time, you think about the fact that the Prophet ﷺ didn't make it complicated. He didn't try to make this, confusing and something that, you have to, be a rocket scientist to figure out. Yes, of course, we have ulama, we have mashayikh that, study the deen and they explain it. But still, at the same time, he's very clear that you enjoin the good and you forbid the evil. And this is part of being part of the strangeness, right? And a couple of points I want to just emphasize that you mentioned, right? Being strange, it's not for the sake of just being strange. You're not just wanting to look like an outsider, right? It's a natural path of the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, right? As you mentioned, and the times that we live in especially. And then the other thing, I think you kind of gave this example accidentally, that when you pick up the hot coals, right? When we hold the coals, right? But there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that says this as well, that there will come a time where holding on to the deen will be like holding on to hot coals, right? So I think very much so. I mean, you can say that many people have lived through difficult times, right? But I try to give myself this analogy so that I can motivate myself more. And I think this should be, a perspective that people can find some comfort in as well, right? That you see the fitna around, you see the corruption, you see the difficult tests that the people are going through, and you have an option, right? To either isolate yourself and ignore it, right? Or well, the first option is you're part of the corruption, right?
Yeah,
hopefully
of course,
not.
Yeah.
The second option is you isolate yourself, and the third option is you play a part in reviving the Ummah, as the channel's name suggests, but you play a part in enjoining the good and forbidding the evil. And is that this hadith is not just something you apply to the individual. Yes, this is something that an individual can use for his individual actions, his ibadat, but this is also a societal, a communal aspect to this hadith as well, right?
100%. But just to be a small point real quick, just to be very clear, we're saying it applies to the individual perspective and the collective perspective, right? So like to give a very, very short example, like in a university setting, right? A Muslim who is growing out his beard, wearing a thobe, praying praying his 5 salawat on time, and staying away from free mixing, right? Especially that last one, staying from free mixing. This is something that's strange, right? And that's an individual perspective, right? And then also on a collective level, of course, like we talked about before, the way of life that Islam calls for is very, very strange to the current system that we see in the world. So it's definitely both.
Yeah. And I think it kind of depends on what level of influence you have, right? You're able to, as the Prophet said, change whatever you can with your hand, if not with your tongue, right? And if not, then hate it in your heart. That's the weakest of iman. So, for example, for the viewers that are listening, right? Many of us, have gotten the opportunity to be some sort of leaders, whether it's in our families, whether it's for our brothers and sisters, or for, our broader family, maybe our cousins, right? It may be our community, it may be our masjid, it may be the MSA board that we're on. We have a level of responsibility to make sure that, whatever responsibility that we have, whatever duties that we are in charge of, that we make sure that they're held according to the Islamic standard. And then beyond this, right, what do we do to be able to get this ummah at large, to be able to follow the Islamic systems that you mentioned, right? And of course, we all have a role to play into this. One thing I wanted to mention, And I believe Ibn Kathir, he mentions this in his mentioned this story in one of the tafsirs, is that to kind of shed importance on the aspect of communal obligations versus individual obligations. He mentions that there was a time where there was a very righteous man in a very corrupt city. It was a city that was filled with corruption, people that had left the ibadat and the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there was a religious person who kind of isolated himself from the society. Regardless, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He told the angels to go and destroy the city. And the angels, they went there and they found this righteous man. And they went back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and they said, Ya Allah, there is at least one person in this city, in this village, in this town, that worships you day and night, that doesn't spend his time in this corruption. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded the angels to destroy the city, starting with him. And you think about why? Why would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala command such a severe punishment for this person specifically, starting with him? And it's the fact that he forgot about the rest of society. He isolated himself. He thought that the teachings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not obligate him to go and enjoin the good and forbid the evil in society. And like you mentioned, that is a very, very important aspect of our deen. Anything else that you want to mention on this topic before we go to kind of the next subject? I know they're all kind of related, but just curious on this hadith specifically.
Yeah, actually, like one small thing on that, just again highlight how, or even to hit home another point, which is that this individual in collective duty, like this individual duty in making ourselves righteous, and then also the collective duty of making our society and our surroundings righteous, actually go hand in hand, right? We see, I'll mention two hadith. We see Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, المؤمن الذي يخالط الناس ويصبر على أذاهم خير من المؤمن الذي لا يخالط الناس ولا يصبر على أذاهم. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says that the mu'min who يخالط is it mixes. He mixes with the people and he's patient upon their affliction. So notice, he mixes with the people and he's patient upon the affliction he receives from the people is better than the mu'min who does not mix with the people. He stays away from them, and he's not patient upon their affliction. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is clearly saying that a mu'min, right? It's not saying a Muslim, a mu'min, right? A mu'min, the one who's a true believer in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This person's iman is, he's worse. Prophet saying the person who mixes with the people and is patient upon the affliction he receives from them because he's calling to this path of La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, this person's better. His iman is better. He's a more fulfilling of La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. So that's a very, very important point, right? That we can't, just like in the story you mentioned, you can't be individually righteous while also being absent from affecting the society around you, right? And again, we see this in the famous hadith about the boat, which we're not going to mention here, but about the top level and the lower level. But essentially the lesson to take from it is the fact that a Muslim can't just be salih, or be from the salihun, be someone who's from righteous, or from amongst the righteous, but he has to be from the muslihun. He has to be from the one who is making others righteous too. Who, again, just like we mentioned in the other narration of the hadith, fixing the corruption that people do. And just to tie this all together, the reason why this is so important, and why I mentioned in the beginning that that this is not mutually exclusive, the individual and collective duty, and that they actually go hand in hand. Another hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, وَالَّذِي نَفْسِي بِيَدِهِ. So he's swearing by him in whose hand is my soul. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is swearing by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, وَالَّذِي نَفْسِي بِيَدِهِ لَتَأْمُرُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَلَتَنْهَوُنَّ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ. Right? That you must enjoy the good and forbid the evil. And after that, if you don't, أَوْ لَا يَشُكَنَّ اللَّهَ أَنْ يَبْعَثَ عَلَيْكُمْ عِقَابًا مِنْهِ. If you don't, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send upon you a punishment from Him. ثُمَّ تَدْعُونَهُ فَلَا يُسْتَجَابَ لَكُمْ. And then you'll make dua for Him, dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for the situation that you're in. فَلَا يُسْتَجَابَ لَكُمْ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not respond to you, right? In other narrations, it mentions that, that خِيَارُكُمْ, the best of you will make dua, and they will not be responded, right? So why these narrations and why these ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam keep emphasizing this enjoying the good and forbidding the evil in the lack of a person who has a lack of effect on his surroundings, on correcting his surroundings, the lack of effectiveness of his dua. the lack of effectiveness of his iman, right? These go hand in hand. So again, it's something you have to keep in mind, especially nowadays where it's, a very popular
You know,
idea in Islam just to be someone who is, very spiritual and making dua and turning to dua, which is the weapon of the believer, 100%. We don't,
of course.
we
Yeah.
don't make dua something that's very little. It's very important. But dua without the proper action is done incorrectly, right? And just to mention one small thing, I'll end off right here. Especially like looking at the issue of Gaza and like you mentioned before, issue of Syria, and of course Kashmir and Yemen and Iraq and
Right.
all the other Muslim lands, right? Ibn al-Qayyim, he mentions in Madarij al-Salikin, he says, لقد أجمع العارفون على أن الرجاء لا يصلح إلا مع العمل. That those of knowledge have a consensus that hope, the mere fact of having hope for the victory of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, having hope for the victory of the people of Palestine, having hope to see a light at the end of the tunnel, right? This is something that we all have, right? This hope is not done correctly, and it's not accepted إلا مع العمل, except unless you pair with the action. So again, you have to have that action to tie in to that
Yeah.
spiritual aspect of making dua.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair. I think that's
Yeah.
a very much needed perspective, with the times
Yeah.
that we're living in today, right? I think there's this large emphasis, like you said, right, about making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course, no doubt, we do that with every time that we can, all the effort that we can. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the victory. But you're saying, as the scholars have mentioned, and we know from the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that the action is just as important, and we cannot leave the action behind. And this is, I think, a good segue into our next topic, because we see that the Ummah is struggling. We see that the Ummah, no matter how numerous they are, right? And as the hadith will mention, no matter, you look at the Ummah, it's 2 billion plus, right? You see the Ummah, it's got the strategic land, it's got the resources, it's got the people, it's got the military. But still, we saw this genocide in Gaza happen. We've seen the civil war in Syria, where the regime bombarded and destroyed the Muslimin there. We saw what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan and Kashmir, and the list is so long that, we can spend the whole podcast going over it. But why does it happen? Why does this reality exist? And, partially maybe that answer is found in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, which we'll kind of discuss now, where the Prophet ﷺ, he says, he's talking to the Sahaba, and he mentions in one of the narrations, it says that the nations will call each other against you as they come towards a dinner where there's a dish in the middle and they're all coming towards it and eating it, right? And another narration, it mentions that it's like a pack of wolves that are trying to basically come and get to its prey. And so the Sahaba, they asked him, will it be because of our small numbers, right? Because this is a natural thing to think. And the Prophet ﷺ, he says, no, you'll be numerous at that time, but you will be like the foam of the sea, meaning you would be worthless. You're the scum, right? And then he says, the Prophet ﷺ says, and Allah will remove the fear of you from the hearts of your enemies and cast wahn into your hearts. And so somebody asked, what is wahn, ya Rasulullah ﷺ? He said, hubbud dunya wa karahiyatul maut, love of the dunya and hatred of the death, right? And I think this hadith just puts what you kind of said right now into perspective, and kind of what I repeated as well. And it is scary, but I don't know, do you want to expand on what this disease of wahn is and what it's done to us, and maybe some advice on how we can, how do you personally deal with it, right? Because this dunya is, unfortunately, the dunya is designed to be able to capture as much of the people as it can, right?
Yeah, 100%. And to be honest, I think this hadith isn't even just like, not just partially why we have these issues in the ummah, but I think it is the sole reason, right? And of course, from it branches off, of course, like more practical ways of identifying or categorizing the issues in the ummah. But I think at the sole cause or the core foundational issue is hubbud dunya wa karahiyatul maut, the love of dunya and the hatred of death. And if we expand more on this meaning, right? The Muslim, and this is a statement that these days might sound weird, right? But a Muslim is someone who should love death and hate life. He feels like a stranger in this life. He feels like a stranger, someone who's, like the hadith mentions, traveling in a path. He's a traveler in this life, right? And he should feel more connected and fully devoted to the akhirah, right?
And he doesn't belong here. He knows his home place is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah.
100%. And that's why this love of dunya and hatred of death, why? You love the dunya so much that you're so attached to it and you do everything to stay attached to it, right? And that anything that even pushes you towards death or has, a possibility of risking this dunya, this is something that, it's something that you don't want to follow, right? And the Quran talks about this, right? In Surah Al-Qasas, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, in the context that, the Prophet is making dua to the people of Mecca, or making da'wah to the people of Mecca and calling them to the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, calling them to La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. And the response is, وَقَالُوا إِن نَتَّبِعُ الْهُدَى مَعَكَ نُتَخَطَّفُ مِنْ أَرْضِنَا. That they said, if we follow the guidance with you, we will be, taken away from the land. We'll be captured from the land. Right? They're scared for themselves in their provision.
All right.
And then it continues. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala posed the question, obviously a rhetorical question, right? He says, أَوَلَمْ نُمَكِّنْ لَهُمْ حَرَمًا آمِنًا يُجْبَى إِلَيْهِ ثَمَرَاتُ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ رِزْقًا مِنْ لَدُنَّا. Right? And essentially, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala poses a question, a rhetorical question, and He says, didn't we create for them a safe haram, a safe sanctuary, where plenty of provision from every different kind of provision comes in for them, right? And Allah is mentioning that we brought this for them, right? What I cannot throw in, but most of them do not know, right? This issue of being attached to dunya and being attached to your rizq, your provision, and making the guidance you follow or making your life surrounded by this seeking of provision is what caused the people of Mecca to turn away from the huda. Because notice they said, وَقَالُوا إِن نَتَّبِعُ الْهُدَى مَعَكَ نُتَخَطَّفُ مِنْ أَرْضِنَا. They didn't say that this is misguidance. They're acknowledging this is guidance, but they're saying this is too risky. This is too risky.
Yeah.
Right?
There's too much to lose right now.
It's too much to lose. And that's why, this idea of the love of the dunya and the hatred of death, it's something that a Muslim needs to uproot from his heart. He needs to remove it. He needs to understand and review his aqidah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has set a certain time called the ajal, the lifespan that will end, and no one can bring that forward or bring that backward, right? And just to mention one small hadith that, inshallah, should inspire us, right? Because it's a concept that we understand, we know, and repeat over and over again. We hear over and over again. But sometimes, we need these reminders to benefit us as believers, but also some examples or the way the Prophet ﷺ would say it will help us, inshallah. So he says, ألا لا يمنعن أحدكم رهبة الناس أن يقول بحق أو يذكر بعظيم. That Rasulullah mentions that none of you should be stopped by, the fear of the people from speaking the truth or reminding them of a very important reminder. فإنه لا يقرب من أجل ولا يباعد من رزق أن يقول بحق أو يذكر بعظيم. That verily, it does not bring closer your time of death, nor farther any rizq for you to speak the truth or remind of an important reminder, right? So at the end of the day, these ahadith and these ayat that built personalities like Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, who would read the Quran even though he knows in public, even though he has no tribe, he has no one to defend him, he knows he might not come back alive. And he knows for sure.
He was one of the smallest, weakest people that the Prophet exactly. had at that time, right? He was a short, skinny person.
100%.
They used to make fun of him.
Yeah, exactly.
They used to make fun of his legs because they were so skinny.
Yeah.
And the Prophet said that his legs weigh as much as the mountains of Uhud, right?
And this person was reading the Quran in public, 100%. This person was reading the Quran in public, and he was the first of the Sahaba. After Rasulullah ﷺ, he was the first one to read the Quran in public. And he went out and did it. Why? Because he knows that thawabul akhirah, that the reward of the akhirah is unimaginable in the face of the dunya, and he knows none of them can do anything to him. None of them can do anything to him in terms of harm or benefit, except with the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this hadith is an important pillar for understanding our situation.
Absolutely, 100% agree. It's funny you mentioned the example of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. A few hours ago, I was just giving a talk on this at the masjid, and I mentioned, just to conclude the narration, that he was warned by the Sahaba, don't go.
Yeah.
You have no one to protect you. Yeah, and you're gonna get beat up. And he said, I have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect me.
Yes.
And he went and he started reciting the verses that directly challenged them. Ar-Rahman allama al-Quran khalaqa al-insan. Telling them that this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that created us, that sent this Quran down, that we worship, that we believe in, to take the system from. We reject your idolatry, we reject your systems. And they beat him so bad. And then the Sahaba, they came to him, right? And what did they say? They said, Abdullah bin Mas'ud, this is what we worried about. This is what
Yeah.
we feared would happen to you. And he says,
Yeah.
Wallahi, I'll go and do the same thing
Yeah.
again tomorrow if the Prophet ﷺ
Yeah.
asks me to. So he has this absolute clarity and understanding of what it means to understand your rizq is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It cannot be changed. Yani from a perspective of and no, like saying the words of truth or going and challenging the tyrants, right? And I think that this is something that we as an ummah today struggle with, right? This concept of understanding that your rizq cannot be, changed, right? You have this rizq that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already written for you. You cannot increase your wealth or decrease your wealth, right?
Yeah.
Of course, you change the means or you put in the effort that you need to, but to think that you are in control of these things or you're in control of your lifespan or you're able to avoid death, right? These are
Yeah.
concepts that come from shaitan to avoid us earning the ajr that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us the opportunity to gain. It's traps for us to get attached to the dunya, right? And you see, I think one of the problems is that once you go down this path, you go deeper and further, it's harder and harder for you to kind of see the path of Islam, the nur of Islam,
Yeah.
right? And I think that the tyrants or the hukam of the Muslimin and the hukam al-Arab today, they're so far gone down on this path of attachment to this dunya that they think that anything that they can do for Islam, they can't do it, right? Because they think that they're going to lose their families, they're going to lose their wealth, they're going to lose their status. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that this is what you will be tested with. He tells us that this is your test. And I think that Allah made it so easy, right? He told us what the test is going to be, right?
100%. Yeah.
I'm not saying, obviously in the moment it's not difficult, but part of the test is that you're able to deal with the difficulty because you have al-akhirah to wait for. And we have countless
Yeah.
examples from the
Yeah.
Sahaba, from the Anbiya before us. Yeah, I kind of went on a long tangent
No,
there,
man, you're
but there's
good.
a lot to unpack here,
No,
right?
no, 100%, 100%. And on that point, that last point you mentioned, about it being harder in the moment, but when you zoom out and you remove, whatever hardship that is in whatever situation, it becomes kind of obvious. It's like, oh, of course, I should just follow what Islam says, right? If we go deeper into this hadith and we look at dunya and the hatred of death, essentially what the hadith is talking about in the context of commitment towards Islam is cowardice. It's cowardice, right? And the reason why this is important to point out is because guidance in Islam is there for us. It's given to us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides this path of guidance for us. Now, the human is the one who chooses to follow his path of guidance or chooses to follow any other path, right? Now, the importance and the reason why I mentioned also in the beginning, why this hadith is the cornerstone, the foundation for the issues in the ummah, is because without a strong nafsiyya, a strong spirituality that is connected and only connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you'll never be able to have this istiqamah, this steadfastness on the path of guidance, right? If you have this love for dunya, right? If you have this hatred of death, then you won't be able to follow this path of the prophets, this path of the Sahaba, this path of the people who don't fear anyone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're going to face all these tests that hit you and they'll knock you down, just like you said, right? And of
You're not
course,
ready to sacrifice anything.
you're not ready for
Yeah.
sacrifice. And that's a cornerstone for change to happen in society, of course, in general, but also a cornerstone for someone to have istiqamah, to have steadfastness. And it's tawfiq from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us all that istiqamah, right? But this is why the hadith is so important, is you have to build up that strong spirituality by building your connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning through salah, through qiyamul layl, through praying at the masjid, through dua, through reading Quran, through learning more about who is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is Al-Jabbar, who is Al-Qawi, who is Al-Raziq, right?
Yeah.
Who is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? When you learn about Him subhanahu wa ta'ala, it becomes much more clear in your eyes who can hurt me and who can benefit me. Who should I follow and who should I not follow? So these priorities become very, very clear. So again, this,
Mm-hmm.
Jazakallah khair, it's a very, very important point.
Yeah, I would say that this example, if you can see it in one place today, obviously there are people that are enjoining the good, forbidding the evil. There are ulama, there are mashayikh, there are activists that are going
It's
through
a
these
lot,
tests all
100%.
over
Yeah,
the world, right?
100%.
One person, Afia Siddiqui, I'm sure you've seen, her story. And subhanAllah, may Allah subhanahu make her test easy and
I
allow
mean,
her
free
to be
her.
able to grant,
Allah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, any sort of peace, at this point, right? And you
Yeah.
think about not just her, I just mentioned her name because it's been kind of on my mind, but there's people like that all over the world, right? But when you look at a collective group of people, you see it especially in Gaza today. You see people that were able to sacrifice everything for the last 15 months because they wanted to remain steadfast. They wanted to remain earning the highest ajr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And one specific person from this was our Ammu Khalid, right? The Khalid, I believe his last name Nabhan, Khalid Nabhan, right? And we saw, from the beginning of the genocide when he was holding his grandchildren, his granddaughter Reem in his hands, and he was the next day, going out and comforting the people, reminding them, that this is not the end of the world. There is an akhirah. These people are getting Jannah. You can smell the musk off of them, right?
Yeah.
And then subhanallah, at the beginning of this year, I believe, or the end of last year, he's also taken away, right, with these airstrikes. But when you see this level of iman, that people that don't have this love of dunya and have more of an attachment to the akhirah, to an attachment to meeting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you see it collectively in Gaza. And I think that's a opportunity for the rest of the Muslims outside for us to take a big lesson from this, right? And not just look at the people in Gaza and post on our Instagram story and be like, wow, mashallah, right? No, of course we think of them in the highest levels. We make dua for them, but we take lessons from them that we can apply in our own lives and be able to sacrifice just as much as they did, right? And we feel the pain that they are feeling, right? But they are passing their tests every single day. And I think
Yeah.
our test is much more questionable, right? The people that are outside Gaza, what
100%.
our test entails is much more because we're responsible for them. We're responsible for what is happening, right? And I think, yeah, this hadith and even the hadith from the beginning, right? I think they're both interconnected because on one side you have Wahn, but if you reject this idea of Wahn and you reject the idea of loving this dunya, then you'll be seen strange by majority of the people that love the dunya, right? So they're very interconnected together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah,
It's
go ahead.
yeah. This is like a really, really good point. And I want to mention something that, like, to tie it back to what I was mentioning before about really understanding or building this connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to stay steadfast on this path, right? The person who yani, I want to say isn't familiar with Islam or it doesn't have a strong connection with the Quran, he's going to think that in his mind that death is the end. And that's another reason why he's so scared of death, right? He thinks that this is going to be the end, right? When in fact, like you mentioned, Khalid Nabhan, rahimahullah, right? In fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, don't even say that the ones who are killed fi sabilillah as dead, rather they're alive with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being provided for. And on top of that, in the next ayah it says, they're happy with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them. And of course, we know in the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he mentions how the martyr wants to go back and die again fi sabilillah, right? So
Over and over again, yes.
100%. Look how Islam flips the script, completely flips the script. And then
Yeah.
to even add on top of that, if the person who doesn't contemplate on the Quran and build a strong relationship with the Quran, he's going to miss like these ayat that speak about the sacrifice required for Jannah. And there's like a
Mm.
really nice statement that one of my mashayikh said, Jahannam is covered with, things that have been decorated for the human being as very nice and very desirable. Whereas Jannah is covered in trials and tribulations and afflictions, right? So
Allah. Yeah.
so if you look in the Quran, it says this, right? أم حسبتم أن تدخلوا الجنة ولما يأتيكم مثل الذين خلوا من قبلكم. That did you think? How could you even think that you could enter Jannah? ولما يأتيكم, and it has not come to you yet. مثل الذين خلوا من قبلكم. The example of those who have come before you. And it continues on and mentions how, so much different afflictions, types of affliction, in terms of risk, in terms of life, in terms of pain, etc., and torture. have come to them to the point that they were so shaken. Without going through all of this, Allah is saying, how could you even think you're going to enter Jannah, right? So unfortunately, these days we're poisoned by these incorrect understandings that, whoever says La ilaha illallah, he enters Jannah, right? This is true, but it doesn't mean you're going to go to Jannah straight away. You might spend time in
Yeah.
Jahannam, and we know that
Unfortunately.
even one dip in Jahannam is too much that none of us can handle, right? So at
Allah
the
protect us all.
Ajmain. So the point is, just like you said uh, the Gaza point, and how this is really a test for us, and we're the ones who really need to be worried about our akhirah, 100%, because this ayah that I mentioned, and hundreds more we can mention, that speak about the affliction and the test required for a Muslim to be deserving of Jannah. When we look at ourselves, do we see those tests in our life? And I recently gave a khutbah where I talked about this, how the recent Gaza ceasefire, this is something that, I'll be very careful with my words. This is something that is for the people of Gaza to celebrate. For them,
Mm-hmm.
they should celebrate. They should celebrate,
Mm-hmm.
time to rest, celebrate time to count their dead, celebrate time to just
To rebuild,
to
to
rebuild,
take a test, to have some time to breathe.
100%. But
Yeah.
when it comes to us, who are living outside, who have let down the people of Gaza, who have failed to secure the help they need militarily, to secure the help they need in terms of food, water, and drink, and shelter, right? The ones who are living very comfortably, especially us who are living in America, in the West in general, living very, very comfortably, right? We have nothing to celebrate. We can celebrate for them and feel good for them 100%. That's very, very important as a Muslim. But for us to celebrate that, oh, a ceasefire happened. Number one, the ceasefire isn't even really a ceasefire. Like just today, I was reading the news. There's more
Unfortunately.
in northern Gaza Strip. People are still being killed. Number two, on top of that, Trump himself, that when he asked about the Gaza ceasefire, he said, "I'm not confident, but it's their war. They'll take care of it, etc. I'm not confident it's going to stay though." So he already knows that.
And the military aid is still going through.
No, he increased military aid.
Hey,
SubhanAllah. So and then number three, which is a very, very important point, Netanyahu increased the aggression that was already occurring for the past 2 months in West Bank because of the pause and ceasefire on Gaza, right?
mhm,
In
mhm.
the West Bank, and to make even the picture like even worse, and we have to know the reality, right? If we're going to be reacting with sleeplessness and fever towards the situation of the Ummah, we have to at least know what's happening in the Ummah, right? So for the past 2 months, the Palestinian Authority has been attacking the people of Palestine themselves, right? And now Netanyahu, because of ceasefire in Gaza, is directing more aggression towards the West Bank. So for someone to celebrate this ceasefire as if this is the end of the war in Gaza, this is the end of the war on the people of Palestine in general, and we've succeeded in having a victory. It's gullible, it's foolish, and it's very, very sad, unfortunately. In reality, we should be crying for the situation in Gaza. We should be people who are sad for our lack of ability, right? And I'll end
Mhm.
off with this. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, أشد الناس بلاء للأنبياء ثم الأمثل فالأمثل, right? And also Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, من يرد الله به خيرا يصب منه. That Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned in the first hadith that the ones who are tested the most are the prophets, ثم الأمثل
Mhm.
فالأمثل, then the ones who are next best and next best. So look at the tests of the prophets. Look at the tests of the Sahaba. Look at the tests of the people of Gaza, and then look at our tests. So look at where do we fall? So what hardships are you experiencing in your life? What hardships are you experiencing towards your commitment to the Ummah? Do you feel that
Mhm.
holding this membership of being part of the Ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, do you feel the weight of this membership in your life? Right? And in the second hadith, whoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants good for him, he gives him affliction and gives him trials. He makes his life harder, right? So that the
Mhm.
tests of a person are based off his iman and his level of iman. And if we see, maybe this is something we can take away, inshallah, like one point to take away from this podcast. If we see a lack of hardship and a lack of tests in our deen, in our religion, in
Mhm.
this, of course, in this dunya, right? In our deen, meaning that commitment to the deen, trying to stay hold to the deen, and we feel genuinely that hot coal. And in the dunya, in the sense that so many different pressure from, your provision. For example, if you speak up, your work might, cut you off, or your university might kick you out, etc. If we don't,
Right.
if we don't see these kind of threats in our life, then we have to ask ourselves, are we truly speaking the truth? Are we truly reading the same Quran, the same Surah Al-Rahman that Abdullah bin Mas'ud was reading in Mecca? Are we reading that same surah in the same way it's supposed to be read, in the same context it's supposed to be read, with the same effect it's supposed to have? So it's
Yeah.
it's an important lesson. Yeah.
The Prophet ﷺ, he said in another hadith, paraphrasing again about Abdullah bin Mas'ud, he said that if you want to listen to the Quran and understand the Quran and hear the Quran the way it was revealed, in the freshness that it was revealed, go to listen to Abdullah bin Mas'ud and see how he recites the Quran, because he understood it, right? He understood the impact of these verses. And I mean, you mentioned a lot of good points there, and we'll try to wrap up here, but kind of just some key takeaway points, right? Is that I think when you look at what happened with Gaza and you saw the Ummah, I think, the average person, right? I'm not talking about the influential people. I'm not
Yeah.
talking about the
Yeah.
armies. I'm not talking about the hukam. I'm talking about the average person. You can see that they deeply care and they
100%.
want to do
Guaranteed.
something, right? And the unfortunate reality that we live in today is that these people are being misled, or they're not being given the opportunity to do what is required, right? What is required, we all know what is required, right? But they're being led astray, unfortunately. And we ask the people, the people that have some sort of influence, that have the ability to move and change society, to have the ability that have some sort of power, to be able to use their power for the sake of Gaza, to use it, to be reminded of the akhirah, to let go of the wahn that they have in their hearts, so that they understand their obligation that they have towards their brothers and sisters in Gaza. So Jazakallah khair again, Brother Muhammad. Last thing we'll kind of end off on. I know you Jazakallah khair, you shared a lot of great points for us, but taking the first hadith and the second hadith kind of together, the idea of being strange and the idea of rejecting the wahn from our hearts. What are some just one or two key takeaway points that we can apply into our daily lives today? I'm sure many of the people that are listening to this podcast are, young individuals, people that are in college or recently graduated, young professionals. And so what are some 2 or 3 things that they can apply, immediately after listening to this?
Yeah, exactly. That's a very good question. To be honest, the first thing that came to my mind is, number one, building a strong connection with the Quran. And without going there too long, just pretty much building a connection where it's not just memorization for the sake of memorization, but you're reading through the Quran and you're contemplating on the Quran, on what lessons and how can I apply it in my current life, right? And also to do the same with the seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because and this is the foundation. This is the most important thing. Number one, most important thing is to know the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to know the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And through when you read these stories in the Quran and you read these ayats in the Quran and read the story of the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you'll see very clearly this idea of justice and truth and standing up for truth. So that's my first most important point, practically.
And I'll add on to that is that with the times that we're living in today is very similar to Mecca.
Yes.
And the Prophet ﷺ gave us a blueprint how to get to Medina, how to implement this
100%.
justice, how to build this system that's built upon just Islam, right? Whether it's the economic, political,
100%.
judicial, social, so on and so
100%.
forth. But it's there, right? It's there in the seerah. It's not hidden from us. And so I would echo the point that you just made, that making this correct connection with the Quran and tying it to the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ.
100%. The second point I wanted to mention was to embody the idea of standing up for truth or enjoying the good and forbidding the evil and categorically rejecting the falsehood, right? And what I mean by that practically, meaning, for example, if you're a university student or like a young professional, someone at work, embody Islam in your life completely, right? So don't be afraid to, for example, like show up to school in a thobe, or to grow out your beard, or to completely live your life in Islam, to tell them, hey, actually, I don't do this, I don't do that, and make very clear that priority in your life, right? And also, that's on like an individual perspective, but also on a collective perspective. Remember that you're part of an ummah, right? Remember that you're part of an ummah that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said is supposed to react with sleeplessness and fever when one part of the body aches. That's supposed to be like a building that supports each other in times of need. And part of the rights that your brothers in Islam have upon you is that when they asked you for help, يستنصروكم في الدين فعليكم النصر. If they asked you for help, if they asked you for support, for say in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the name of religion, then you must support them, right? So understand you have this global responsibility because you're part of the global ummah, right? So practically, what does that mean for us, who are young professionals in the university? Raise your voice, use your voice. This is something that is readily available to us, readily available. The only thing stopping us from using our voice is shaitan and our own nafs. Again, like we spoke about today about being strange, right? Shaitan will make you feel strange that, oh, look, I'm someone sitting in the West and I'm talking about, Islam being a way of life, bringing back an Islamic state, these ideas, right? To live Islam in every single part of your society. This is something that's strange.
Mind your own business instead. Focus on getting your money up.
And the idea of
buy a
secularism in
house.
general, 100%. The idea that like why you're bringing your deen into quote unquote politics, which maybe we can discuss, some other podcast. This like shubha, the doubts that have been spread about politics and deen being different, right? But the point is to speak up, right? And don't feel strange that you're speaking up because you're holding on to this hot coal of Islam. And if you ever do feel strange, because a human being, might feel strange at times, right? In this dunya, when you do feel strange in those times, remember that you're the closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that time. Remember that. And then also, number 2, remember that when your nafs speaks to you and says, but if I speak the truth, if I, for example, start to give khutbahs, or I'm giving, or if I'm giving khutbahs, or I'm speaking to brothers in a smaller discussion circle, or etc., wherever I am, right? Mm-hmm. If I speak the truth, or if I say the truth clearly, and again, this does not mean without hikmah, without, a kind word and being kind speech and understanding of the people you're speaking to, right? If you avoid that word of truth because you're scared of your provision, remember, and you're scared of this life and the consequences that can come in this life, then remember that this is your nafs talking. And remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has what's better ready for you in the akhirah. And imagine if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had only told you that you have Jannah waiting for you in the akhirah, right? You have, everything, right? Yeah, whatever you want in Jannah is there ready for you. And on the Quran says on top of that, we have even more. لَهُمْ مَا يَشَاءُونَ فِيهَا وَلَدَيْنَا مَزِيدٌ. They have whatever they want in there and more, right? And actually, like, whatever you can even think of, Jannah has more than that, right? Imagine Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, this is your reward, and then that's it. He didn't, and he said you have this dunya to go and work and strive in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in it, right? That's already enough. That's already enough of a motivating factor to stand up in front of any tyrant, stand up in front of anyone and say that word of truth, right? But imagine Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on top of that said that no one in this dunya can touch you unless I already wrote down that they were going to harm you. And if I wrote down that they're going to harm you, then it's guaranteed they will harm you, no matter, even if you go in a closed off building, a safe building, and you run away, death will come to you. That harm will come to you. Yeah. Imagine. So look how profound that is. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala laid out Jannah and Jahannam, and on top of that, guaranteed that this life is written for us. The pens have been lifted and the papers have been dried, right? So when you understand the profoundness of that point, you see that there's absolutely no reason for me not to speak the truth in my daily life. So practically, again, become more active in terms of your personal ibadat and your connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and make it your goal that I'm not trying to become closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just so I can feel a spiritual high. And again, that topic needs a whole podcast on its own. Like, what do we mean by this? By spiritual high and this secularized concept of religiousness, right? But I'm strengthening my connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? So that when I face these tribulations that are bound to come because I'm following the path of the prophets, and I want to be afflicted as a stranger, as 100%. And I want to face the trials that the prophets faced because I want to meet them in Jannah, in Al-Firdaus, right?
Inshallah.
Well, if I don't have those personal ibadat down, then I won't have the strength to face these trials and tribulations. But also, I can't be the other way around, right? That I only focus on these personal ibadat, and I don't even go out and get involved, for example, if I'm in a university context in MSA, and start to have discussions about the issues of the Ummah, and start to spread awareness to people that I know, and start to bring shuyukh to speak about, this issue and that issue, to speak very clearly, to draw a straight line next to the crooked one, even if you're in a university setting, to say very clearly your opinion that I find Zionism to be 1, 2, 3, and I find the occupying state, the Zionist entity, I find it to be illegal, and I find it to be 1, 2, 3. Don't be afraid to say this, right? And don't be afraid to get involved in the masjid and to encourage the masjid board, or if you are on the masjid board, to organize events that are speaking about these issues, right? Because at the end of the day, practically, living in the West, this is what we can do, right? We have our tongue, and this tongue has a right upon us to speak the truth, and to stand up for this deen the way the Prophet said.
Yeah, and it will testify on the day of judgment.
100%. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, there's not much to say after that. I will add that this aspect of, again, being a part of the communal obligations, it helps, grow the brotherhood and the bonds between yourself and the believers around you, right? And when you start doing this, you surround yourself with good company, and it gets easier and easier to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and leave, whatever is taking you away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the ibadat in every single aspect, right? And there's so much blessings that come from this, right? You enjoying the good together, you forbid the evil together, you build this bond between each other. And really, there's a lot of khushu in this, right? And so we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us amongst those that please Him. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reunite us in the day, under His shade, and so on and so forth with the prophets.
If I could add one small thing.
Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. It's I forgot one point that I found, especially in these current times, I found really helped me as a point of reflection.
Practical thing to do.
100%. Right? Something we say commonly, or we hear commonly, and inshallah Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what's in our hearts, and inshallah it's true, right? We say that, oh, if I could, I wish I could have the opportunity to be there with the people of Gaza, right? And to see what they're seeing, and to go through what they're going through, and to attain the level of spirituality and the level of Jannah that they're attaining, right? And part of that, of course, is a struggle in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is jihad fi sabilillah, right? And of course, inshallah, subhanahu wa ta'ala makes us truthful in this, and if we have hypocrisy in our hearts, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives us for that, and rids us of this disease, right? Allah, I think this is a good closing point too. We forget that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put in front of us the best form of jihad available to us, right in front of us. The hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions أفضل الجهاد كلمة حق عند سلطان جائر, that the best of jihad is a word of truth in front of an oppressive ruler, right? So imagine the best jihad, right? In other hadith, it speaks about you can be at the level with Sayyid al-Shuhada, Hamza bin Abd al-Muttalib, the leader of the Shuhada, right? Radiallahu anhu. So the point I'm mentioning is that we say this all the time, that I wish I make the intention to go through what people of Gaza are going through and be with them. And some of us, alhamdulillah, we doctors I know, for example, will go across, and participate and help out people of Gaza over there medically, right? Just to get that hands-on feeling of helping the Ummah, right? And help out with whatever little they can do on an individual perspective, right? Individual capacity. But again, it's important to remember this perspective, that sometimes this love of dunya and hatred of death causes deception. And the deceptor, al-gharur, shaitan, deceives us into thinking that we don't have this opportunity right in front of us. So to end off, imagine you have the opportunity right in front of you. Jannah is right in front of you. Shaitan points you towards, oh, look over there. Look in their situation over there. They're the ones attaining Jannah. You're the one over here. And what you need to do is just say, if I was there, I would do what they're doing. Or inshallah, I would support them. Because
that's the easier thing to do.
Exactly. Instead of take the opportunity right in front of you, which is the best form of jihad, right? Which is speaking that truth, that word of truth. So inshallah, that inspires anyone.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Muhammad, for that reminder and an amazing discussion. Inshallah, we ask that the listeners and the viewers, they benefit from this. And as always, drop us a comment, send us a message if you have any advice for us on how we can improve this show for you. But again, Jazakallah khair, everyone, for joining in, and we'll see you guys in the next episode. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.